I was jolted awake by a frantic pounding on my front door, so loud and urgent that, for a split second, I thought the world might be ending. Maybe the sky was falling, or perhaps there was some kind of life-or-death emergency. Rusty, my loyal dog, was already in full alert mode, barking up a storm as if he was personally offended by whoever had dared to disrupt our peaceful morning. Still groggy, I swung my legs out of bed, quickly slipping on my boots. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a neighbor in distress? A farm-related crisis? A lost traveler? Whatever it was, it had to be serious for someone to hammer on my door like that at this hour. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I finally yanked open the door. Standing there on my porch were two uniformed police officers, their hands uncomfortably close to their holsters, their expressions unreadable. And just beyond them, parked like it owned the place, was Nancy Wilkins' pristine white SUV, the emblem of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association practically gleaming under the morning sun. And there she was, Nancy herself. Arms crossed, lips tugged into that signature smug smirk of hers, radiating self-importance. Right then and there, I knew my morning had just taken a sharp turn for the worse. Jack Benson. One of the officers, an older guy with a stiff posture, spoke up. His partner, younger and noticeably uneasy, was already glancing around like he expected trouble. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, keeping my expression neutral. "Depends," I replied casually. "Who's asking?" "Officer Daniels, County Sheriff's Department," he stated flatly. "We've received a complaint regarding unauthorized structures and illegal livestock on this property." For a moment, I just blinked at him. Then, unable to help myself, I let out a deep, booming laugh, one that was so sudden and hearty that even Daniels shifted awkwardly while Nancy practically vibrated with outrage beside him. "Illegal structures?" I finally wheezed, wiping an amused tear from my eye. "Officer, this barn's been standing longer than you've been breathing. And unless they changed the law overnight, having cows and chickens on a farm isn't exactly a crime." Nancy, never one to back down when she thought she had the upper hand, stepped forward, waving a thick stack of papers as if she were delivering the divine law itself. "This property," she announced, voice dripping with self-satisfaction, "falls under the jurisdiction of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. And you, Mr. Benson, are in clear violation of our community guidelines. That barn is an eyesore and your animals," she gestured wildly, "are creating noise pollution." I tilted my head, pretending to think it over. "Noise pollution," I repeated slowly. "On a farm. Imagine that." I let out an exaggerated gasp. "Newsflash, lady, animals make noise. It's kinda their thing." The younger officer stifled a chuckle, but Daniels kept his face carefully neutral. "Sir," he said, sighing, "we just need to verify the claims. Do you have proof of ownership for this land?" Rolling my eyes, I motioned for them to step inside. I strode over to my desk, yanked open a drawer, and pulled out an old, dusty document, the deed to my land. I slapped it onto the table with a satisfying thud. "Here you go," I said, crossing my arms. "Benson Acres. Privately owned. Not part of any HOA." Daniels took his time scanning the papers, while Nancy hovered over his shoulder, her face darkening with every passing second. Finally, after a painfully long moment, he nodded. "It checks out," he confirmed. "This property is outside HOA jurisdiction." Nancy's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. But he's ruining the neighborhood aesthetic," she spluttered, her face rapidly turning an alarming shade of red. I shrugged. "Not my problem," I said simply. "Unless you have a warrant or an actual legal issue, I'd appreciate it if you all left my property." Daniel sighed again, clearly regretting whatever series of life choices had led him to this situation. "Ma'am," he said to Nancy, "we can't enforce HOA regulations on non-members. There's nothing we can do here." Nancy let out an enraged huff, muttering about community values, as she spun on her heel and stomped back to her SUV. The officers trailed behind her, and within moments, they were gone, leaving me standing on my porch, shaking my head in disbelief. I figured that was the end of it. Just another power-hungry busybody trying and failing to flex her authority. But, oh, how I underestimated Nancy Wilkins' determination to get her way. The very next morning, as I stepped outside with my coffee, something new caught my eye. Nailed to my fence was an official-looking document, stamped with the Willow Creek HOA's letterhead. A formal notice of violation. It read, listing out several so-called infractions. I ripped it down without a second thought, shaking my head as I stomped back inside. Ignoring it seemed like the best approach. Nancy had no real power here, after all. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, my mailbox was bombarded with letters, each more threatening than the last. There were warnings of steep fines, legal action, even absurd claims that my land could be seized if I didn't comply. Nancy was throwing everything she had at me, determined to wear me down. And then one evening I noticed something else. A black SUV, idling near my fence. Two men in matching uniforms loitered nearby, whispering to each other, occasionally pointing toward my barn. Suspicious, I made my way over. The moment they saw me, they straightened up like guilty schoolboys. One of them stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Benson," he said smoothly, "we're with the Willow Creek HOA enforcement team. We're here for an inspection of your property." I let out a slow, deep breath, crossing my arms as I met his gaze with a look of pure, unimpressed disbelief. "You're what?" I asked flatly. He puffed up slightly, as if that would make him look more authoritative. "We have the right to conduct an inspection." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me stop you right there." I pointed toward the road. "You're not stepping foot on my land. Now get back in your little car and drive off before I call the real authorities." The other man, looking far less confident now, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we have the authority." "Not on my land you don't," I shot back. "Now get lost." They hesitated for a moment before finally exchanging a look and retreating to their SUV. I watched as they drove off, gripping the clipboard like it was some kind of shield. I knew this wasn't over. Nancy Wilkins wasn't done yet. And something told me the worst was yet to come. I let out a slow, deliberate whistle, my lips barely moving as the sound carried through the air. Behind me, my bulls, massive, muscle creatures weighing over a ton each, began shifting, their heavy hooves striking the dirt with deep, echoing thuds. The men in front of me exchanged nervous glances, their confidence visibly cracking as they eyed the beasts now steadily advancing toward the fence. One of them cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. We'll be in touch," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. Before I could even reply, they turned on their heels and practically dove into their SUV, slamming the doors shut like the bulls might charge at any second. I watched, unimpressed, as the vehicle peeled out, kicking up a trail of dust in its desperate retreat. This was getting downright absurd. And then the real kicker. A few days later, I was out in the fields, tending to my work, when I heard it again. Sirens. Not just a single cruiser this time. No, this was a full-blown spectacle. The entire county sheriff's department seemed to be rolling in, their flashing lights cutting through the mid-morning sun. My stomach tightened as I set my tools down. What now? Stepping toward my driveway, I saw the sheriff himself climbing out of his car, his expression a mix of exhaustion and irritation. I sighed. "Sheriff," I greeted, bracing myself. "What's the crisis of the day?" He gave me a long, knowing look. "Jack, I have to ask, why am I suddenly receiving multiple complaints about you running an illegal farming operation?" I groaned, rubbing my temples. "Let me guess," I muttered. "The HOA?" "Bingo," he said, crossing his arms. Shaking my head, I gestured for him to follow me. As we walked the property, I filled him in. Nancy's relentless harassment, the fake HOA enforcement team, the endless stream of letters threatening legal action. The sheriff listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his face growing increasingly unimpressed with every detail. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "Jack, you know all of this is nonsense. But technically, I have to respond to complaints, no matter how ridiculous they are." I threw my hands in the air. Great. So, what am I supposed to do? The sheriff smirked slightly. Well, look, if they're trespassing, you've got every right to defend your property. Just don't go overboard. I felt a slow grin spread across my face. Define overboard, Sheriff. He narrowed his eyes at me, instantly suspicious. Jack. But it was too late. The wheels in my head were already turning. If the HOA wanted a fight, I'd be more than ready. And I had the perfect secret weapon. Nancy Wilkins was relentless. Most people, after being shut down by law enforcement twice, would take a step back, maybe even consider dropping the whole thing. But Nancy? Oh no. She was the kind of person who believed that if she just pushed hard enough, reality itself would eventually bend to her will. Unfortunately for me, that meant she was far from finished. I caught my first glimpse of her latest scheme when I noticed a small group gathering near the far end of my property. They weren't even trying to be sneaky, pointing at things, measuring the fence line, whispering among themselves like they were strategizing an invasion. Curious, I grabbed my binoculars. And sure enough, there she was. Nancy, clipboard in hand, barking orders at her little team of minions like a general preparing for war. Rusty, my ever-loyal dog, bounced beside me, tail wagging, completely unaware of the absurdity unfolding before us. I took a deep breath and strode over, already knowing this was going to be another headache. As soon as she spotted me, Nancy's face lit up with that insufferable, self-satisfied smirk, the one she always wore when she thought she was winning.
Jack.
I'm so glad you stopped by, she chirped, flipping through the pages on her clipboard. We're just conducting an official survey to determine how much of your land falls under HOA management. I blinked. Then, I burst out laughing. A full, unfiltered, belly-deep laugh. Nancy, I finally managed between chuckles. There is no we. And you're not surveying a damn thing on my property. That's called trespassing. Nancy let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes. Jack, let's be reasonable. The HOA has standards, you know. The barn, the animals. Honestly, your whole vibe is dragging down property values. I raised an eyebrow. My vibe is a problem? She lifted her clipboard. According to our assessment. I cut her off, smirking. Oh, did you suddenly gain psychic abilities? Because I don't remember giving you or your minions permission to assess anything here. Nancy's lips pursed. We don't need to step onto your land to see it's a disaster. One of her lackeys, a guy who looked like he spent more time in a golf cart than doing actual work, chimed in, puffing out his chest. Technically, the HOA rules state that any land visible from community homes is subject to community improvement guidelines. I stared at him for a long moment. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week. Nancy huffed. Jack, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to involve the legal system. I shook my head, letting out a slow breath. All right then, Nancy. You want to play hardball? Game on. The next morning, I was up before sunrise, setting my plan in motion. I had a hunch Nancy would escalate things, maybe even try to pull some stunt involving the county. But I wasn't unprepared. Not by a long shot. And sure enough, by mid-morning, I spotted a police car making its way down my gravel driveway. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I leaned against the fence and waited as the sheriff stepped out, looking more tired than usual. Sheriff, I greeted. Jack, he replied, pinching the bridge of his nose like he already had a headache. I sighed. Nancy filed another complaint, didn't she? Of course she did. He let out a weary chuckle. Wanna guess what it's about this time? I folded my arms. Let me guess. She's claiming my barn is a public safety hazard? He nodded. And that it violates county zoning laws. I scoffed. Sheriff, with all due respect, does this place look hazardous to you? He took a long, sweeping glance around at the well-maintained land, the sturdy barn, the peaceful animals grazing in the distance. Finally, he shook his head. Nope. Then why are you really here? He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Honestly, he admitted. I thought I'd swing by before things got too heated. There are rumors. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of rumors? He hesitated for just a second before saying, "Rumors that Nancy isn't quite done yet, and she might be pulling some strings to make this official." I let out a slow breath, my grip tightening on the fence post. "Good," I muttered under my breath. "Let her try." Because if Nancy thought she could push me off my land, she had another thing coming.